Hey everyone, welcome back. Dave in History for the Ages here. So something fun this time. Some of my videos are pretty serious, some are more fun. History's full of all sorts of things. And this is a topic I've wanted to talk about before, how gunpowder ended the age of knights. And it's a really interesting topic in terms of what led to this. Was it actually just the cannons at Constantinople? Was it actually, things that happened before that, like at the Hundred Years' War battles? And so I'd really love your comments after you watch the end of this. What do you think was the most important factor that ended knights during this period of time? And of course, just your general thoughts on the video and other, interesting ideas about military history. Anything you want to comment or ask, I'd love those in the comments there. So here's some pictures of where you had kind of like armor looking at different time periods in the Middle Ages. So essentially, let's start with the birth of the knights before we talk about how knights end. How does it begin? And so you're looking at an image here actually from the Bayeux Tapestry. This is really cool. I have a little 2-minute video I made on the Bayeux Tapestry. If you've never seen it, don't know what it's about. It depicts this major battle, the Battle of Hastings, 1066, very famous battle in history. And so you can watch that if you want to. And so this is kind of like the heart of the Middle Ages, 1066, right? And so way before this, when we get the quote unquote fall of the Roman Empire, and I know, Rome doesn't just disappear overnight, and I have a whole other video on how it's not just the dark ages when Rome ends. The western part of Rome, you have this chaos emerging, and you have, instead of big armies, you see kind of the rise of these mounted warriors who could afford a war horse and armor, and they emerged as kind of more effective fighters during this time. Now, a horse and equipment costs money. So essentially, this is how we get, knights, nobility, who are basically your knights. They fought because they're the ones who can afford the weapons. This is also how we believe we get the whole feudal structure developing. And I don't have a standalone video on feudalism. I cover it in some of my other longer detailed lectures that I have on like the life in the Middle Ages. But essentially what feudalism is about is if I'm the king, I have the land, I give some of my land to a noble, they have kind of rights over that land, they become my vassal, in exchange they promise to fight for me. So as a king, I give land, right? A fief, and then the kind of the building blocks are the manor. A manor is kind of big, a piece of land big enough to support a knight and his horse, which is a little village essentially. And these nobles, they get, they get to live off that land, get to thrive off that land. In exchange, they give military service to the king. It's much more nuanced. There's a lot of other layers in feudalism, which I'm not going to get to in this video, but essentially that's what it's about. So from basically the 9th to the 14th centuries, that's who fought. Knights, nobles, right? What changes it? Well, before gunpowder even was heavily used, you have this really important war, the Hundred Years' War, which actually lasted 116 years, but we call it the Hundred Years' War, and it was fought towards the end of the Middle Ages. And what we start to see happening during the Hundred Years' War, it's a map again. This map you see here, England and France is the fight between them. And what you start to see is that England, during the course of the Hundred Years' War, used non-traditional fighting for the time, specifically longbowmen, right? And I don't know if anybody's ever gone archery shooting before. I have, just a couple times, and it takes some practice. But if you train somebody long enough, a peasant trained for many years is first of all a lot cheaper than raising a knight. And if you've got, all these arrows flying at you very effectively, that's going to really disrupt the fighting style of the Middle Ages. And so what we see in a couple battles, the Battle of Crécy, and then a little later on, the Battle of Agincourt, is even though that the British were outnumbered, and yes, there's a lot of disputes about the numbers of these battles, especially the Battle of Agincourt, but even in these battles where the British were outnumbered, using longbowmen really changed the way fighting was taking place. And so there was a little bit of gunpowder weapons, but it was very marginal at this point still. So some can argue that even before gunpowder, just this transition of using more of these longbowmen already is going to change the way fighting takes place, especially from a king's perspective. You're thinking, huh, do I have to give land to have an army when I can hire some basically peasants and give them a little bit of coins, and there you go, there's my army. So that gets the thinking going a little bit more. And then, of course, you get cannon, gunpowder. This is a image I use when I talk about the Siege of Constantinople. When the Ottomans siege Constantinople, they use the cannons. You can see there, and that that's a game changer, right? Once you've got the cannons, that changes everything. What is that old expression? Never take a knife to a gunfight. And so, what ends up happening is this combined is going to end knights, right? Armor, of course, is going to have to be completely adjusted, right? Knights became too heavy to be able to work in a big open field battle, especially when you compare them to like cheap gunmen or something, right? And if you've ever gone to a gun range, right? How do you fire a gun effectively if you got all this, armor on you? You got to be more mobile. You got to be quicker, right? Castles, the whole point of if the whole point of a knight is there to tied to castle and feudal defense and all of that, I mean, a cannon's going to blow a castle apart. So that, of course, is going to change things as well. So that's going to be a factor as well, right? So kind of knights without castles were just kind of, these are just very expensive horsemen, so to speak, right? And so it made, a lot of the idea of, the fighting using knights just not practically effective or economically effective. Both respects, I think. And so as a result of that, people are just going to figure out that, hey, I don't need to spend a lot of money to have my army. I could forge some peasants. If you're using gunpowder and guns and cannons, a knight is not going to be effective practically either. So from both kind of an economic standpoint and a military standpoint combined, I think that's what more than anything ended the age of knights, right? So, anyways, that's kind of a little overview on it. Hope you found that interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Please share them and enjoy some of my other videos on the Bayeux Tapestry or how the Middle Dark Ages weren't so dark. Kind of cool videos there on that. And I hope you enjoyed that. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thank you for watching.